The multiple species that tried to scare off humanity by looking into their cinema and their history and finding some dangerous creatures from way, way back. They realized that the humans had already figured out a way to not only defeat them, but to tame them. So they needed something else, something bigger. But for this project, it would take a long time, a very long time, to perfect these towering creatures. A long time, and of course, a lot of resources. Yet, if this works, it will all definitely be worth it. They could only make a few different types of these creatures, yet once they were created, they were dropped onto human worlds and just simply let loose. Unfortunately, nothing can get close to the human's cradle world, as they have that one locked down with so much security that even the greatest stealth ships possible would easily be detected. The creatures dropped ranged in size and ability vastly. Most were, of course, bipedal, with massive tails that have enough mass to crush a human population center flat in just a few hours. All have different designs, from massive arachnids that can reproduce asexually, to massive crustaceans, a few that can fly in different types, and massive insects or avian species. There's also others that are strictly aquatic. Some are lumbering quadrupeds with indescribable strength, even a triple-headed wyvern type that was released. And even though a few were concerned about it, they did also release large humanoids that specialize in creating and using massive tools. Most of these were all hopes of drawing the humans in with something familiar and then having them meet their destruction. There were others, of course, that were always seemingly covered and glowing with bioluminescence even in the daytime. Some that fly with other incredible strength, but all had to be able to withstand the depths of the ocean and all its pressures, as this was the reason for the bioluminescence, so they could see as they come up from the base of the ocean and jump out, climb out, fly out to attack and scare the humans. Even with all these monstrous strength, there were still a few parts of this cinema they could not replicate inside these creatures. Feeding on exclusively radiation or simply expelling it via their oral orifice was not something that could be done. Using bioenergy to produce an EMP field or even produce an EMP shockwave without actually killing itself was also impossible, as the simple shockwave through the system would be more than enough to end itself. Some were able to vomit strong acid, and that was simple enough to do, along with the very large bioelectric disturbance in the atmosphere by the three-headed wyvern, which, as it turns out, would be nothing more than a grandiose light show and not really damage anything, maybe disrupt a few control systems, but that's all. Even with these restrictions, it should be enough to frighten the holy crap out of the humans and force them to go away and abandon their planets, retreat to their own area, and maybe think about expanding deeper into the void. It was surprisingly easy to get the massive creatures onto the targeted planets. Monitoring stations were immediately set up so that all the sentients could sit and watch and learn about the humans. Of course, it would be a lie, a complete falsehood, if it was to say there was no entertainment value attached as well to these monitoring stations. At least, there should have been. The aquatic and semi-aquatic failed first out of all of them. The humans simply hit them with massive explosives that sunk into the water, finding each of these creatures and exploding around them, causing massive damage all around them. Many of them simply bled out or died of shock. Those that survived were struck with direct sonic weapons that caused the creature to convulse constantly and violently, so much so that their internal structure completely failed as it began to liquefy. The bodies were seen as they would float to the surface for a while, along with, of course, any other marine life that was caught up in the blast. before the surviving oceanic creatures would arrive to investigate and, of course, begin to devour all that biomass. The different flying creatures survived longer, but not by much. The human air superiority fighters could easily outmaneuver the large, slow bodies of these giants. Guided munitions allowed for many of them to be damaged beyond repair as they plummeted to the planet's surface. Even if they survived striking into the planet's surface with such force and such speed, human vehicles and vessels would immediately surround them and attack them with ordnance from all directions, assuring their disposal. In any case where the flying creatures could stay aloft under all this assault, the humans would simply not let it rest. They would constantly harass it until it decided it needed to stop to rest, to catch its breath, to relax its muscles. And then they would either force it to take off again or tear it apart with vehicles and aircraft while it was on the ground, and even using orbital bombardments as these strange metal cylinders would seemingly drop through and spike clean through these creatures. Those creatures that were land-based caused the most havoc. The humans hit the insect types with burning chemical plasma. The disgust humans have for insects is shown once again as many of these creatures are seen just flailing around with their legs in the air, trying desperately to get this fire to stop burning, but many of them, even if they hit the water, do not seem to stop burning. The crustacean style were killed by sending explosives directly into its maw, the exoskeleton containing the blast as it exploded, turning the insides into sheer liquid as the intestines and the brains simply turned into chunky salsa. Surprisingly, after these creatures fell and were confirmed dead, the humans began to harvest it quickly for the proteins, and the humans constantly called over their communications for something called butter. The large reptiles did not last long either, as their slow movements made them easy targets for ordnance that could penetrate their scales. Surprisingly, the most effective device for stopping these creatures was something called a tank mine. It is, of course, difficult to walk on your feet if your feet are blown open and a piece of metal is simply lodged into the bones several meters inside. This made many of them simply fall down screaming and unable to get back up again. When the largest of these reptiles was halted and it was trying to stand up, a slower cylinder of metal came flying down from orbit. At the moment, the body was pierced from the top down to the bottom, allowing the spike to go clean through this reptile's body and then striking the ground, but not fully penetrating through. The reptile flinched and then stopped moving. It then slumped over forward, bending the cylinder just a little bit. However, it was still not fully laying on the ground, as the body was simply laying there. The longest and thinnest of these creatures actually caused a lot of problems in the populated area, yet the ordnance used against it, especially the ordnance dropped from aircraft, proved to be far more effective than shown in the cinema. Try as they might, the geneticists and engineers could never find a way to place a particular shield, a particular piece of ballistic protection around it, something that the humans call plot armor. The last hope to scare the humans were the robotic creatures that were designed, covered on all sides by massive weapons, kinetic, guided, energy. All these robots carried more firepower than some of the best cruisers known. It seemed as though the humans took this as a challenge, as they brought absolutely everything. Aircraft swarmed the skies, firing whenever they had the chance. Vehicle drove by on the surface, firing into whatever parts they see, usually the legs. Even infantry would try to fire on this, trying to place explosives on the side or simply launching explosives towards it, slowly ripping apart its exterior armor and then tearing apart its soft inner bits. This was able to disrupt the movements just a little bit. A simple manufacturing world seemed to be able to take apart this creature piece by peace. The mechanical monster ran out of ordnance very, very quickly, and even overheated its energy weapon trying to strike so many targets at the same time, and it eventually collapsed on the ground as its legs had taken too much damage. They snapped clean and broke apart. Once on the ground, it continued to try and almost claw its way forward. That is when two metal cylinders came from orbit and simply went clean through it, locking it to the ground and ending the threat as the power completely shut down. Watching this, all the sentients shook in fear at what they had just witnessed. The sheer ferocity and determination, along with the discipline and efficiency, made them all shudder in fear at exactly what in the hell humanity was. Most believed that these humans had no capacity for empathy at all, as they seemed to go at these creatures with such calculated violence, with such disdain, with such a desire to end them, that it didn't make sense. Could it be possible that they're robotic? That they feel nothing? That is until they checked the planet where the massive hominids had been dropped. The 7 of them were on the ground, spread out, and those monitoring saw that they were in fact gone, deceased, but not by any means witnessed before. The humans had actually seen these, flown by and shot them full of tranquilizers to knock them out, and once they were on the ground, they were kept asleep as everything was being communicated. It was discovered that there was simply not enough food on this planet for them to survive. This was a fairly barren planet. Even if they ate all the creatures, all the flora and fauna, it didn't matter. There would just not be enough, and they would slowly starve to death. Since no other planet was willing to come and take them, a choice had to be made. As these creatures slept soundly, each one was given over 100 liters of pentobarbital, phenytoin, and fentanyl each. They were all dead before they woke up, and they went quietly. A much more peaceful way to go than slowly starving to death on a barren planet, having to resort to cannibalism to survive just a little bit longer, and then dying alone through starvation. The rest of the sentients watched as the humans dug massive holes near the body, holes so deep they thought for sure they were going to be building bunkers, but instead the bodies were pulled inside by whatever vehicle they could muster, and once the bodies were inside, carefully placed, they were buried. Seeing such care being taken, the rest of the galaxy realized that the duality they had heard of humans that they had displaced before was actually true. They all paused and considered their next move. As they debated, a message arrived from human space. It was received by all who had a device on hand, breaking through any possible decryption, as every single sentient species received the same message. We are humanity, and we say, don't do that again. We have been aware of you for a long time, ever since you sent the genetically altered dragons to our planets. We know what you're trying to do. We know that you are afraid of us, and you want us to be afraid of you. Yet there is something you must understand about humans. Fear to us is something to be conquered, something to be overcome. If you were, in fact, successful in finding our greatest fear and using it, you would find humanity with absolutely no empathy for you at all. There is something that even we concern ourselves with. If you desire to meet the most dangerous creature, a man with nothing left to lose, then continue on your current trajectory. If you would prefer to meet the empathetic humans, I'm sure we can set something up. 4.8 human cradle world solar rotations later, the treaty was signed, limiting humans' expanse away from others' territory in exchange for knowledge, history, and of course, technology. The treaty itself ended with a final word from the humans before they left back to their territory. Next time you want to deal with grievances, feel free to talk to us first. If any sentient attempts to control by fear, please remember that such ways are known as bullies, desperately trying to maintain their perceived control. We have ways of dealing with bullies. Yet for now on forward, for the foreseeable future, you have nothing to fear from us, provided you leave us alone to live our lives as we see fit for ourselves. Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you for joining me on the second half of this story. Before I go, I need to send out some special thank yous to a few of my supporters, and those will be MTF Guard, Erica Gem, Guardian Sage, Brian Kemp, Douglas Scarborough, SS Demon, Prozac and Pancakes, and Sir. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. Everybody else, I'll see you on the next one. This is Syntax, ejecting.